The conference hall stretched wider than any building humanity had ever constructed. Ambassador David Chen stood before the Galactic Council, his heart pounding as he looked at the dozens of alien species seated in their designated sections. Some had scales, others had feathers, and a few seemed to be made of living crystal. This was humanity's moment. After 200 years of dreaming about the stars, they had finally built engines fast enough to reach them. And waiting out here between the distant suns was an entire civilization that had been watching Earth for centuries. The Council's decision had already been made. Chen could see it in the way the representatives whispered among themselves. The Zafrani ambassador, a tall being with 4 arms and skin like polished blue metal, rose from her seat. Her voice filled the hall without any visible microphone. Humanity, you are welcome to join the Galactic Council. Your engineers are brilliant. Your merchants are fair. Your artists create beauty we have never imagined. But there is one condition, and it is not negotiable. Chen felt his stomach tighten. He had expected restrictions, but the way she said those words made him nervous. You are forbidden from building warships. You may construct cargo vessels, research ships, defensive stations, and civilian craft, but nothing designed for offensive military purposes. This restriction will remain in place indefinitely. The hall fell silent. Chen looked back at the human delegation behind him. General Morrison's face had gone pale. Admiral Rodriguez stared at the floor. They all knew Earth's history. They knew what the Council had seen when they studied humanity's past. May I ask why? Chen said carefully. A different representative stood. This one looked almost human, except for the golden eyes that seemed to see through everything. The eldest, as the other species called him, spoke in a voice that sounded like distant thunder. We have reviewed your history, Ambassador Chen. In the last 5,000 years, your species has fought over 40,000 wars. You have created weapons designed only to cause suffering. You have burned cities, poisoned lands, and turned science itself into a tool for murder. Your creativity and destruction is unmatched in this galaxy. Chen wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Everything the eldest said was true. We do not hate you, the Zafrani ambassador continued, her voice softer now. We fear what you might become if given the tools to bring your wars to the stars. The Council has maintained peace for 10,000 years. We cannot risk that peace even for a species as promising as yours. The vote was unanimous. 53 species agreed to admit humanity under the Terran Restriction Accords. Chen signed the treaty with a pen made from metal, harvested from Earth's moon. It felt heavier than it should have 50 years past. Humanity adapted. They built the finest cargo ships in the galaxy, vessels that could carry more goods faster than anything the Council had seen before. Human research vessels mapped nebulas and discovered new forms of life. Human traders became wealthy, and human colonies spread across a dozen systems. Earth's economy boomed. Children grew up learning alien languages alongside their own. But the military officers resigned quietly. Defense contractors shifted to civilian projects. And deep in government archives on Earth, Mars, and Europa, contingency plans were written, sealed, and locked away. Plans that began with the same words: in the event that the accords must be broken. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo was one of those officers who resigned. She had been Earth's youngest fleet commander, a tactical genius who had studied every major battle in human history. When the accords were signed, she was 40 years old and at the peak of her career. She submitted her resignation the same day Chen signed the treaty. Why fight for a species that's not allowed to defend itself? She told her staff. She retired to a small house in Kenya, overlooking the Great Rift Valley where humanity first evolved. She taught military history at a local university, wrote books about ancient naval warfare, and tried to forget the stars. But every night she looked up at the sky and wondered what would happen when something out there decided humanity was worth attacking. The Council was not cruel. They provided protection, or so they claimed. Their peacekeeping fleets patrolled the major trade routes. Their defense stations guarded important systems. But these forces had not fought a real war in 8,000 years. They trained, they drilled, they studied tactics from ancient conflicts, but none of them truly understood what war meant anymore. Humanity prospered under the Council's watch. The Accords became something people accepted, like gravity or the speed of light. A new generation grew up never knowing what Earth's military had been like. They saw the old warships in museums and laughed at how primitive they looked. They couldn't imagine why anyone would need such things in a galaxy at peace. Ambassador Chen grew old and retired, replaced by younger diplomats who had never known Earth before first contact. General Morrison died, and Admiral Rodriguez followed a few years later. The people who remembered Earth's military power were fading away. Only Sarah Okonkwo remained, now 70 years old, teaching students who had never seen war. She showed them videos of ancient battles, explained the strategies of long-dead generals, and tried to make them understand why these lessons mattered. War isn't about honor or glory, she told her classes. It's about survival, and the species that forgets how to fight is the species that dies when something hungry comes hunting. Her students nodded politely and took notes, but in their eyes she could see they didn't believe her. They lived in a peaceful galaxy. What could possibly threaten them? Sarah looked up at the stars that night and felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. Something was coming. She didn't know what or when, but 50 years of peace had made the galaxy soft, and when the danger arrived, the Council would learn why humanity had been forbidden from building warships in the first place. They would learn that some rules exist to be broken. The distress call came from the Outer Rim on a Tuesday morning, Earth Standard Time. The message was broken, filled with static and screaming. The words that came through made no sense at first. They're eating the stations. They're eating everything. God help us, they're multiplying. Then silence. The Council's response was immediate but confused. They sent a peacekeeping fleet to investigate. 12 ships commanded by officers who had trained their entire lives but never fired a weapon in anger. The fleet arrived at the Outer Rim 3 days later. What they found was documented by their sensor logs before their transmissions stopped. The stations were gone, not destroyed but consumed. In their place floated thousands of dark shapes, each one roughly the size of a small ship. They moved with purpose, stripping asteroids down to nothing, converting matter into more of themselves. When the Council fleet approached, the shapes turned toward them. The battle lasted 11 minutes. All 12 Council ships were destroyed. Only one managed to send a final message: they adapt. Every weapon we use, they learn. They're not ships. They're alive. The galaxy learned the name later, the Void Swarm. Nobody knew where they came from or what they wanted. They simply consumed everything in their path and grew stronger. Within a month, 3 Council species at the Outer Rim went silent. Entire civilizations, millions of lives, simply vanished. Planets stripped to bare rock, then the rock itself consumed and converted into more swarm. The Council activated its defense fleets, vessels that hadn't seen combat in 8,000 years. The commanders were well-educated, brilliant strategists who had studied ancient wars and learned every tactical theory. They formed proper battle lines, established communication protocols, and engaged the enemy with textbook precision. They were slaughtered. The swarm didn't follow any rules. They didn't form lines or maintain formations. They swarmed like insects, overwhelming defenses through sheer numbers. When Council ships used energy weapons, the swarm adapted armor that absorbed the blasts. When they switched to kinetic weapons, the swarm grew harder shells. Every engagement taught the enemy something new. The Council lost 40 ships in the first major battle, then 60 in the next, then over 100 when they tried a coordinated assault on a swarm concentration. The enemy was spreading, moving toward the inner systems where the major civilizations lived. Panic spread faster than the swarm itself. On Earth, people watched the news feeds with growing horror. The aliens who had seemed so powerful, so advanced, were losing. The Council that had maintained peace for 10,000 years couldn't stop an enemy that had appeared from nowhere. Human colonies at the edge of Council space began requesting evacuation. Sarah Okonkwo was giving a lecture when her old military communicator buzzed. She hadn't heard that sound in 50 years. She excused herself from the classroom and took the call in private. "Admiral Okonkwo, this is General Park from Earth Defense Command. We need you to come out of retirement." "We need everyone." Sarah looked at her reflection in the window. 70 years old, gray hair, arthritis in her left knee. "What's happening, General?" "We're calling an emergency meeting. Everyone who still remembers what real war looks like. We need to make a decision, and it needs to be made by people who understand what it will cost." The meeting happened in an underground bunker beneath Geneva. 20 people attended, the last remnants of Earth's military leadership from before the Accords. They watched the sensor logs from the Council battles. They analyzed the swarm's tactics, and they all came to the same conclusion. "The Council's going to lose," said Admiral Chen, David Chen's daughter who had followed her father into diplomatic service. "They don't know how to fight. They know tactics, but they don't understand war." "Can we help them?" someone asked. "Not without breaking the Accords," General Park replied. "And if we break the Accords, the Council might see us as a bigger threat than the swarm." The debate lasted 6 hours. Some argued for staying neutral, letting the Council handle their own crisis. Others insisted humanity had a duty to help. The turning point came when a new message arrived during the meeting. New Harmony, a human colony world with 2 million people, had been attacked. The swarm had reached human space. The distress calls played over the speakers. Screams, explosions, desperate pleas for help. Then the colonial governor's final transmission. Tell Earth we tried to evacuate. There wasn't enough time. Tell them to fight. Tell them not to let this happen to anyone else. 6 hours after the attack began, New Harmony went silent. Rescue ships arrived days later and found a dead world. The oceans were gone. The atmosphere was gone. Even the bedrock had been stripped away, leaving behind a smaller sphere of barren iron and nickel. Gray dust drifted in clouds where cities had stood. And around the dead planet the swarm multiplied, building new vessels from the mass they had consumed. Sarah Okonkwo stood in the bunker and felt something cold settle in her chest. She had known this day would come. 50 years she had waited, teaching and preparing, hoping she was wrong. Now the bill had come due. We build warships, she said quietly. We break the accords and we fight. The council will try to stop us, Admiral Chen warned. Let them try. We're not asking for permission. We're not debating this. We're going to war, and anyone who tries to stop us is in our way. The vote was unanimous. Earth's Prime Minister was informed immediately. She was a young woman, 43 years old, part of the generation that had never known war. She listened to the military leadership explain their decision, and Sarah watched the fear and determination war in her eyes. How long until we can field a fleet? The Prime Minister asked. 2 years if we mobilize everything. Maybe 18 months if we push hard. Then push hard. I'll inform the council. The message went out the next day, broadcast on every frequency, translated into every council language. Earth's Prime Minister stood before the cameras, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was saying. The Terran restriction accords are void. Humanity will begin construction of military vessels immediately. We will fight the void swarm. The council may assist us, sanction us, or attempt to stop us, but we will not watch our species die because of a treaty written by people who forgot what survival costs. We warned you. We're doing it anyway. The council's response came within hours. Threats of sanctions, blockades, military action to enforce the accords, demands that humanity stand down and let the council handle the crisis. The messages grew increasingly desperate as more worlds fell to the swarm. Earth ignored them all. The forges were already burning. The shipyards over Mars worked 24 hours a day. Lights blazed across the construction frames, bright enough to be seen from Earth's surface with the naked eye. Humanity had built these facilities to construct cargo vessels and research ships. Now they were being retooled for something the galaxy hadn't seen in 10,000 years, a human war machine. The council sent delegations to stop the construction. They arrived in diplomatic vessels, carrying sanctions and threats. Earth's new Secretary of Defense, a former cargo pilot named James Torres, met them at the orbital station. You're violating the accords, the Zafrani ambassador said, her blue metallic skin somehow conveying anger despite its inflexibility. The council will not tolerate this. Torres looked at her with tired eyes. Then stop us. Send your peacekeepers. Send your fleets. We'll add them to the list of things we need to fight through. You don't understand what you're doing. This is why you were restricted. Your species turns everything into weapons. You'll become the very thing we feared. Maybe. But at least we'll be alive to regret it. Your people are dying out there because you forgot how to fight. We never did. The council imposed sanctions. Human ships were banned from major trade routes. Human goods were blockaded. Human colonies outside Earth's immediate sphere were isolated. None of it mattered. Earth's economy shifted to total war production, something humanity had done before and knew how to do efficiently. The designs that emerged from Earth's military bureaus shocked the council observers who remained. Where council ships were elegant and efficient, human warships were brutal and practical. The first class off the production lines was designated indomitable, and everything about them screamed violence. They had no energy shields. Council officers couldn't believe it when they saw the specifications. Instead, the Indomitable class featured layered armor plating thick enough to stop anything short of a direct antimatter blast. The ships were compartmentalized into dozens of sealed sections, each capable of functioning independently. A ship could lose half its structure and still fight. The weapons loadout was equally disturbing. Council ships typically carried 1 or 2 weapon types optimized for efficiency. Human ships mounted everything they could fit. Railguns that fired metal slugs at relativistic speeds, plasma cannons that melted armor, missile tubes that could launch everything from conventional explosives to nuclear warheads, and laser arrays for point defense. If one weapon didn't work, switch to another. It's wasteful, a council engineer complained while touring a construction yard. Too many redundant systems. Too much mass dedicated to weapons. The efficiency is terrible. The human engineer beside him shrugged. Efficiency doesn't matter if you're dead. These ships are built to take damage and keep fighting. That's all that matters. The council was more horrified when they learned about human tactical doctrine. Human captains were trained to ram enemy vessels if their weapons failed. They were expected to sacrifice damaged ships to buy time for others. The concept of acceptable casualties, which the council had abandoned millennia ago, was fundamental to every human battle plan. Worse still, humans volunteered by the millions to crew these death traps. Young people who had grown up in peace signed up to fight an enemy they barely understood. They painted names on their ships. Vengeance, retribution, remember New Harmony. They sang war songs over open communication channels. They marked kills on their hulls like ancient fighter pilots. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo was brought out of retirement to command the First Fleet. She stood on the bridge of the UESS Defiance, the first super dreadnought humanity had built in 70 years, and felt decades fall away. This was what she had trained for. This was why she had never truly let go. The ships came together faster than anyone expected. 18 months after Earth declared it would fight, the First Fleet was operational. 32 destroyers, 16 cruisers, 8 battleships, and the Defiance itself. It wasn't enough to win the war, but it was enough to start fighting back. The council sent one final delegation before the fleet launched. The eldest himself came, the ancient being who had condemned humanity's violent history 50 years ago. He met with Okonkwo in her ready room. "I came to see if we were right to fear you," he said. Sarah poured him water. The universal gesture of hospitality humanity had learned from the council. "And what do you see?" "I see a species that remembers war. I see weapons designed not for show but for killing. I see soldiers who sing songs about death." He paused. "I see why we were afraid. Are you here to stop us?" "No, I'm here to ask for help. The council is losing. We've lost 60 systems in the last month. Our fleets are being destroyed faster than we can rebuild them. We don't know how to fight anymore." "Perhaps we never did, not like you." Sarah sat down across from him. "What are you offering?" "The Accords are suspended for the duration of the crisis. Full access to council resources and intelligence. Alliance, not servitude. And afterward we'll renegotiate everything. We're going to fight whether you help us or not. We've already started. But having the council's support will save lives." She extended her hand. "We have a deal." The eldest looked at her hand, then clasped it in his own. His skin felt like warm stone. "I hope we're doing the right thing. But I fear that even if we win, the galaxy will never be the same. You're unleashing something we've kept locked away for 10,000 years. "We're unleashing humanity," Sarah said. "You'll just have to trust that we remember why we fight." The First Fleet launched 3 days later. Humanity had been forbidden from building warships for 50 years. They had obeyed, built civilian vessels, and prospered in peace. But they had never forgotten what they were. And now, as the ships accelerated toward the front lines, the galaxy would remember too. The crew of the Defiance gathered in the main hangar for a ceremony before the first battle. Admiral Okonkwo stood before 3,000 people, young and old, from every nation on Earth and every colony humanity had built. She didn't give them speeches about honor or glory. She told them the truth. "We're going into battle against an enemy that adapts to everything we throw at it. We're going to lose ships. We're going to lose friends. Some of you won't come home. But we're going to fight anyway because that's what humans do. We fight when we're told we can't. We fight when the odds are impossible. We fight because giving up means dying and we're too stubborn to die quietly." The crew roared their approval. Sarah felt the sound wash over her and remembered why she had become a soldier in the first place. Not for glory or power, but for this. Standing with people who refuse to surrender. "Let's show the swarm what happens when you attack humanity," she said. "Let's show the council why they were right to fear us. And let's show the galaxy that the species that built the pyramids, that split the atom, that reached the stars against all odds, is not going to roll over and die." The First Fleet jumped to faster than light speed, heading toward the Kepler Junction, where the swarm was massing for another push into council space. Behind them, Earth's forges continued burning, building more ships, preparing more crews. The war had begun, and humanity would fight it the only way they knew how, with everything they had. The Kepler Junction was a strategic choke point, a region where three major trade routes converged around a cluster of neutron stars. The Void Swarm had taken control of it 6 weeks ago, and every Council attempt to retake it had failed. Now the junction served as a staging ground for swarm forces pushing deeper into civilized space. If it wasn't stopped here, 12 more systems would fall within a month. Admiral Okonkwo's first fleet dropped out of faster-than-light speed at the edge of the system. Sensors immediately lit up with contacts. The swarm had grown. What should have been thousands of vessels was now tens of thousands, each one built from the consumed matter of dead worlds. "They know we're here," reported Commander Harris from the tactical station. "They're moving to intercept." Sarah studied the holographic display. The swarm was forming up, creating a wall of vessels between the human fleet and the junction itself. It was the same tactic that had destroyed Council fleets. Overwhelming numbers, adaptive defenses, relentless pressure. "All ships, this is Okonkwo. Remember your training. We're not here to trade shots and retreat. We're here to break them. Battle formation Delta. Give them everything we have." The human fleet split into 3 groups. It wasn't elegant like Council formations. It looked chaotic, almost random. But there was method in it. The destroyer groups would hit the flanks, moving fast and hitting hard. The cruisers and battleships would punch through the center. And the Defiance would lead from the front, drawing fire and attention. The swarm surged forward to meet them. The first contact came at extreme range. Swarm weapons that spat streams of corrosive matter that could eat through Council shields in seconds. The human ships didn't have shields. The matter struck armor plating and burned, but the layered defenses held. The ships kept coming. "All weapons, fire at will," Sarah commanded. The human fleet opened up. Railguns hurled slugs of depleted uranium at a significant fraction of light speed. Plasma cannons superheated the space between ships. Missiles streaked out by the thousands, some carrying conventional warheads, others carrying nuclear payloads that had been banned by the Council for 8,000 years. The humans didn't care about banned weapons. They cared about killing the enemy. The swarm's adaptive armor began working immediately. Energy weapons became less effective. Kinetic rounds started bouncing off hardened shells, but the humans had anticipated this. As one weapon type failed, they switched to another. When the swarm adapted to railguns, the ships switched to missiles. When missiles became less effective, they switched back to energy weapons. The swarm couldn't keep up. They had never faced an enemy that carried such diverse weapons. They began to falter, their formations breaking as ships tried to adapt to multiple threats simultaneously. "Destroyer Group Alpha, press the left flank. Make them pay attention to you," Sarah ordered. "Battleships focus fire on the largest concentrations. Don't give them time to adapt." The battle turned into a brutal slugging match. Human ships took massive damage. The destroyer UESS Intrepid lost its forward section to a swarm ramming attack, but kept fighting, its remaining weapons still firing. The cruiser Bangkok was cut in half, but both sections continued to engage enemy targets until their power cores failed. The Council observers watching from long-range sensors were horrified. Human ships were dying, but they were taking the swarm with them. And unlike Council vessels that retreated when damaged, human ships fought until they were destroyed. 3 hours into the battle, Sarah made a decision that would define human warfare for the rest of the war. The destroyer Courage was crippled, its engines destroyed, its weapons nearly depleted. The captain requested permission to evacuate the crew. "Negative, Courage. How many crew do you need to maintain heading and speed?" There was a pause. Then the captain's voice came back, steady despite the chaos. "Give me 10 volunteers in 5 minutes. We'll give you one hell of a distraction." The Courage adjusted course, pointing directly at the largest swarm concentration. The ship's remaining crew evacuated to other vessels while 10 people stayed behind. They pushed the engines to maximum, sent a final transmission singing an old Navy hymn, and rammed the Courage into the swarm formation at relativistic speed. The explosion vaporized 300 swarm vessels and disrupted their entire formation. The human fleet poured through the gap, breaking the swarm's defensive line. 6 hours after the battle began, the swarm retreated. They left behind thousands of destroyed vessels and scattered into the outer system. Humanity had won its first major engagement. The cost was severe. 30 ships destroyed, 12,000 crew members dead, and most surviving vessels damaged. But the swarm had lost an entire fleet, and for the first time since they appeared, they had been forced to retreat. Word spread across the galaxy within hours. The species that wasn't allowed to build warships had just won a battle the Council couldn't. Delegations began arriving at Earth, some seeking alliance, others trying to understand how humanity fought so effectively. A council tactical observer who had watched the battle requested a meeting with Admiral Okonkwo. He was a Viridian, a species known for their analytical minds and tactical brilliance. He had studied every council battle against the swarm, looking for patterns and solutions. "I don't understand," he said to Sarah. "You won, but you lost a quarter of your fleet. The council would consider that a defeat." Sarah was reviewing casualty reports, writing personal messages to the families of the dead. She didn't look up. "Did we complete our objective?" "Yes, you secured the Kepler Junction. Then it was a victory. War isn't about preserving ships. It's about accomplishing the mission, whatever the cost. But your people died. The captain of the Courage died. 10 volunteers died. You could have retreated and preserved your forces." Now Sarah looked up. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, but they were hard. "If we had retreated, the swarm would still control the junction. More systems would fall. More billions would die. Those 12,000 people gave their lives to prevent that. Their sacrifice had meaning. That's what you don't understand. You've had peace so long you forgot that sometimes the price of victory is paid in blood." The Viridian was quiet for a long moment. "The Council fears what you're becoming. We see your tactics, your willingness to sacrifice, your brutal efficiency. You're proving why the Accords existed. Maybe. But we're also proving that we're the only ones who can win this war. Your choice is simple. Accept our help and live, or maintain your pride and die. I don't care which you choose. We'll keep fighting either way." Over the next 6 months, humanity won 4 more major battles. Each time the tactics were different, unpredictable and effective. They used asteroid fields to hide ambushes. They exploited gravity wells to trap swarm formations. They even herded swarm vessels into stellar radiation zones where the human ships could endure the punishment longer than the enemy. The swarm began to show something that shocked Council analysts: hesitation. The enemy that had swept through the galaxy without fear was now cautious around human forces. They avoided direct engagements when possible. They tried to go around human positions rather than through them. Admiral Okonkwo was promoted to Supreme Commander of Allied Forces, leading both human and Council vessels. She began training Council officers in actual combat doctrine, teaching them lessons that humanity had learned over thousands of years of warfare. Some adapted quickly. Others struggled with concepts like acceptable casualties and tactical retreats. The war was far from over. The swarm still held vast territories, but for the first time since they appeared, the tide had turned. The galaxy had hope, and that hope wore human insignia and sang songs about death while flying into battle. The war lasted 3 years. 3 years of brutal combat across hundreds of systems. 3 years of humanity teaching the galaxy how to fight again. 3 years of sacrifice that would be remembered for millennia. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo was 81 years old when the final offensive began. She stood on the bridge of the UESS Defiance, now a battered veteran of 40 major engagements. The ship's hull was scarred with impact craters and burn marks. Parts had been replaced so many times that engineers joked she was more spare parts than original construction. But she still flew, and her crew still believed in her. The target was a corrupted dwarf galaxy at the edge of explored space. Council long-range probes had finally found it, the swarm's origin point, the central nexus from which all the others spawned. Destroying it wouldn't kill every swarm vessel, but it would stop new ones from being created. It would break their coordination. It would give the galaxy time to hunt down the survivors. The assault fleet was the largest ever assembled. 200 human warships accompanied by 500 Council vessels crewed by officers who had learned human tactics. They had trained together, fought together, and bled together. The old divisions between species had faded in the face of a common enemy. "All ships, this is Admiral Okonkwo. We've come a long way together. Humans and Council, fighting side by side. Today we finish this. The swarm took billions of lives, they destroyed hundreds of worlds. They made us remember what war means. Now we're going to teach them what it costs to threaten this galaxy." The fleet jumped into the dwarf galaxy and immediately faced the largest swarm concentration ever encountered. Millions of vessels, all shapes and sizes, all built from consumed matter. They had been waiting. This was their home, and they would defend it with everything they had. The battle began at maximum range. Space lit up with weapons fire, missiles, and explosions. Council ships that would have retreated months ago held formation, their captains applying lessons learned from human commanders. When their shields failed, they kept fighting. When their weapons were depleted, They rammed enemy vessels. The galaxy had relearned the art of war. Sarah coordinated the assault from the Defiance's bridge. She was calm, directing fleet movements with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. Split the enemy fleet here. Concentrate fire there. Send the destroyers around the flank. The battle unfolded according to plan. Then the plan fell apart. The swarm's central nexus activated a weapon nobody had anticipated. A pulse of energy that disrupted faster-than-light drives, trapping the entire assault fleet in the system. There would be no retreat. This was a fight to the death. All ships, emergency formation, protect the carriers and support vessels. Battle groups, with me. We're going straight for the Nexus. The Defiance led a spearhead of battleships and cruisers directly into the heart of the swarm formation. It was suicide, and everyone knew it. But it was also the only way to reach the Nexus before the fleet was overwhelmed. The human ships took staggering damage. The battleship Indomitable exploded, taking 10,000 swarm vessels with it. The cruiser Moscow was ripped apart protecting a damaged council carrier. Sarah felt the Defiance shudder as swarm weapons tore into the hull. Alerts screamed across every station, power conduits exploded, sections decompressed, but the engines held, and the weapons kept firing. "Ma'am, we're losing structural integrity," Commander Harris reported, blood running down his face from a head wound. "We can't take much more." "We don't need much more, just get me to the Nexus." The Defiance broke through the final swarm defensive line, her hull glowing red from heat and friction. Ahead, the Nexus pulsed with dark energy, a sphere of writhing matter the size of a small moon. It was beautiful and terrible, the source of everything that had destroyed so much. Sarah opened the fleet channel. "All ships, concentrate fire on the Nexus. Everything you have. Don't hold anything back." 700 ships fired simultaneously. Nuclear warheads, antimatter missiles, plasma cannons, railguns, and weapons the Council had banned for millennia all struck the Nexus at once. The sphere began to collapse, its structure failing under the assault, but it was fighting back, lashing out with tendrils of energy that destroyed ships by the dozens. The Defiance took a direct hit. The blast tore through the engineering section, severing the main power core. Secondary explosions rippled through the ship. Sarah felt the bridge tilt as the gravity generators failed. "Evacuate the ship," she ordered. "All hands to the escape pods." "That's an order." Commander Harris didn't move. "Ma'am, we're not leaving you." "The hell you aren't. I'm an 81-year-old woman who should have died in bed 20 years ago. You're all young enough to have lives after this. Get out of here." "Admiral, the Nexus is still active. If we retreat now, this was all for nothing." Sarah looked at the tactical display. The Nexus was damaged but healing itself, drawing matter from destroyed swarm vessels to repair the damage. They needed one more push, one final strike to break it completely. She pulled up the ship's status. The main weapons were offline, the engines were dead, but the reactor was still intact, held in place by failing containment fields, and the Defiance was already pointing at the Nexus. "Everyone off my ship, now. That's my final order as your commanding officer." Harris understood. His face went pale. "Ma'am, no. We can find another way." "There is no other way, and we both know it. You have 30 seconds to get to the pods before I override the evacuation systems and do it myself. Move, Commander." The bridge crew reluctantly evacuated. Sarah watched them go, these young people who had followed her into hell and back. When the bridge was empty, she sealed the doors and took control of the ship's reactor. She opened a channel to the fleet. "This is Admiral Okonkwo. All ships pull back to minimum safe distance. The Defiance is going to finish this." Protests flooded the channel. Council captains and human commanders both begging her to wait, to let them find another solution. Sarah smiled and closed the channel. She didn't have time for arguments. She released the reactor containment fields and engaged the emergency thrusters. The Defiance lurched forward, accelerating toward the Nexus. Sarah strapped herself into the captain's chair and thought about her life. She thought about the young officer who had resigned 50 years ago, rather than serve a neutered military. She thought about the students she had taught, trying to keep the memory of war alive. She thought about the moment she had been called back to service and how right it had felt to stand on a warship's bridge again. "I lived a good life," she said to the empty bridge. "Got to die doing what I loved. Not many people can say that." The Defiance struck the Nexus at full speed. The reactor detonated, a miniature star born in the heart of the swarm's home. The explosion consumed the Nexus, vaporized millions of swarm vessels, and sent a shockwave through the entire dwarf galaxy. When the light faded, the Nexus was gone. The swarm vessels throughout the galaxy fell silent, their coordination severed. They became targets instead of threats, isolated vessels that could be hunted down over time. The battle was over. The war was won, and Admiral Sarah Okonkwo died as she had lived, fighting for humanity until her last breath. The casualty reports came in slowly. 200 million people dead across all species, entire fleets destroyed, dozens of worlds left devastated. But the galaxy survived, and it survived because humanity had broken a treaty and done what was necessary. 6 months after the war ended, the Galactic Council convened to discuss the Terran Restriction Accords. The debate was intense. Some species argued the accords should be reinstated. Humanity had proven exactly why they were dangerous. Their willingness to sacrifice, their brutal tactics, their adaptation of everything into weapons. They were too dangerous to leave unrestricted. Other species disagreed. Humanity had saved the galaxy. They had taught the Council how to fight again. They had paid the highest price in lives lost. They deserved the right to defend themselves. The human delegation was led by Ambassador Chen's granddaughter, Maria. She was 40 years old, a veteran of the war who had commanded a destroyer in the final battle. She stood before the Council and gave the simplest speech in the history of galactic diplomacy. We're not asking for permission anymore. The accords are void, not because you're lifting them, but because we no longer recognize their authority. We fought, we bled. We saved this galaxy together. We're keeping our warships. If that makes us dangerous, so be it. At least we're dangerous and alive. The Council voted. After weeks of debate, they reached a compromise. The accords were officially dissolved, but humanity agreed to participate in a mutual defense treaty. They would share military technology, train Council officers, and serve as the galaxy's first line of defense against future threats. Partnership, not restriction. The memorial for Admiral Okonkwo was built at New Harmony, on the site where 2 million people had died. The planet had been terraformed again, brought back to life. The memorial stood in the center of the new capital, a statue of an old woman standing on a ship's bridge looking up at the stars. The plaque read, "They warned us not to build warships. We did it anyway, not because we love war, but because we refuse to die helpless. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo and all those who gave their lives so others could live." A young Council officer visited the memorial, her first assignment after graduating from the new combined military academy, where humans taught Council species the art of warfare. She stood before the statue for a long time, then asked her human guide a question. "Do you think you'll ever need these warships again, now that the threat is gone?" The human was a veteran, gray hair and old scars marking him as someone who had fought in the war. He looked at the warships in orbit, human and Council vessels patrolling together. "Hope we don't, but we'll keep them ready anyway. The swarm wasn't the first threat, and it won't be the last. Peace is good, but it's fragile. War is terrible, but sometimes it's necessary. The galaxy forgot that lesson. Cost billions of lives to remember. We're not forgetting again. That's the human way?" The veteran smiled. "That's the survivor's way. And that's what we all are now. Survivors who remember what it cost." They stood together in silence, human and alien, looking up at the ships that orbited overhead. Ships built to kill, maintained in hope they would never be needed again, but ready, always ready, because the galaxy had learned its lesson. Some rules exist to be broken, and some species refuse to die quietly.